The brand on Kerra's shoulder burned in the summer heat. Though the iron had kissed her green skin, 10 years passed, and the wound had long since scarred over. She pressed her palm against it through the rough fabric of her work dress as she stood at the edge of Kieran Lawson's property, watching him guide the plow through the turned earth with steady hands. The late afternoon sun painted everything gold, but she could not feel the beauty of it, only the weight of what she needed to ask, and the certainty that he would turn her away like all the others had. 3 farms in 2 weeks had sent her walking when they saw the mark. The traveling merchant who gave her a ride this far had asked too many questions about what a lone orc woman was doing on the roads, and his eyes had lingered in ways that made her check the knife at her belt. She had jumped from his cart at the first crossroads and walked the rest of the way to this valley, following rumors of a farmer who might hire anyone with strong hands and a willingness to work. But rumors were often lies, and hope was a luxury she had learned not to trust. Kieran straightened when he noticed her, one hand moving to wipe the sweat from his brow. He was broad across the shoulders in the way of men who earned their strength through labor rather than battle. His brown hair darkened with moisture and his shirt clinging to his back. He studied her for a long moment, and she stood still under his gaze, letting him see what she was. Green skin, tusks that curved just slightly over her lower lip, pointed ears that caught every sound, hands that could break a man's arm if needed, though she kept them loose at her sides now. "Help you," he called out, his voice carrying across the field without aggression but without welcome either. Kerra walked forward until only the fence separated them. Up close, she could see the lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind that came from squinting into too many sunrises. He was perhaps 30 summers, maybe a handful more, old enough to have seen war, young enough that it might not have hardened him completely. She hoped. "I am looking for work," she said, keeping her voice even. "I can plant, harvest, tend animals, mend fences. I do not eat much and I do not ask for coin, only food and a place to sleep that keeps out the rain." His eyes traveled over her, not with hunger but with assessment. She was tall for a woman of any species, her shoulders nearly as broad as his, her arms corded with muscle from years of labor. The dress she wore was patched in a dozen places, the hem stained with road dust. Her black hair hung in a thick braid down her back, coming loose in places where she had not had time to tend it properly. "You worked a farm before?" he asked. "Many farms. And before that, other things." She did not elaborate. The brand beneath her dress seemed to pulse with remembered pain. Kieran glanced toward his farmhouse, a sturdy structure of wood and stone with a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Beyond it stood a barn that needed new shingles and a chicken coop that leaned slightly to the left. Fields stretched in 3 directions, some already planted with what looked like wheat and corn, others lying fallow. It was the kind of property that needed more hands than one man could provide, the kind of place where desperation and practicality might override prejudice. "I will not pretend the work is easy," he said finally. "Spring planting ran late this year, and I am behind on everything. The days are long and the sun is hot. I am not afraid of work." She met his eyes steadily, refusing to look away first. "The nearest neighbor is an hour's walk. Town is half a day by wagon. You will not have company except mine, and I am not much for talking most days." "That suits me well enough." He nodded slowly, and something in his expression shifted. Not quite warmth, but not coldness either. Acceptance, perhaps, or simply the recognition of a fellow creature who understood what it meant to need something badly enough to swallow pride. "The barn has a loft with clean hay. There is a pump for washing behind the house and a privy that does not smell too bad if the wind is right. Meals are twice daily, morning and evening. I do not care what you are so long as you do the work and do not steal from me. We clear." Kerra felt something tight in her chest loosen just slightly. "We are clear. Good. Put your things in the barn and then come help me finish this field before the light fails. Tomorrow morning we start at dawn." She nodded and turned toward the barn before he could change his mind or ask questions. She did not want to answer. Her belongings amounted to a canvas pack that held a spare dress, a thin blanket, the knife, and a small leather pouch containing 3 copper coins and a smooth river stone she had carried for so long, she no longer remembered why it mattered. She climbed the ladder to the loft and found it exactly as he had described, clean and dry with fresh hay piled in one corner. A small window looked out over the western fields where the sun would set, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to think that perhaps she might stay somewhere longer than a handful of days. When she returned to the field, Kieran had already resumed plowing. He nodded toward a sack of seed and a canvas bag hanging on the fence post. "Follow behind me. Scatter the seed where the earth is turned. The bag has the right measure. Do not use too much or too little." She took up the bag and fell into step behind the plow, her hands moving with the practiced rhythm of someone who had done this work 100 times before. The soil here was good, dark and rich, the kind that would grow almost anything with proper care. Kieran worked steadily, the muscles in his back and arms flexing with each push of the plow. He did not speak, and neither did she. The only sounds were the whisper of seed falling, the creak of the plow, and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. They worked until the sun touched the horizon, and the light turned purple. Kerra's shoulders ached pleasantly, the kind of tired that came from honest labor rather than running. When Kieran finally straightened and began leading the plow horse back toward the barn, she followed, still silent. He showed her how to remove the horse's tack, where to find the feed and water, how to check the animal's hooves for stones. His hands were gentle with the creature, his voice low and soothing. When the horse was settled, he turned toward the house. "Come on, then. I will see what I can make for supper." The house was neat inside, surprisingly so for a man living alone. The main room held a large stone hearth, a scarred wooden table with 2 chairs, and shelves lined with jars of preserved vegetables and dried herbs. A ladder led to a loft above where she could see the edge of a bed. Kieran moved to the hearth and began building up the fire, then pulled out a pot and started adding ingredients: water from a bucket, dried beans, a hunk of salt pork, an onion, carrots. "Sit if you want," he said without looking at her. "It will take a while." Kerra remained standing near the door, uncertain. In her experience, kindness often came with a price that was revealed only after it was too late to refuse payment. But her legs ached and the smell of the cooking food made her stomach clench with hunger. She moved slowly to one of the chairs and sat, keeping her back straight, ready to move if needed. Kieran worked in silence, stirring the pot, adding wood to the fire. After a time, he pulled out a loaf of bread and cut thick slices, then set 2 wooden bowls on the table along with 2 spoons worn smooth with use. When the soup was ready, he ladled generous portions into each bowl and sat across from her. "Go on," he said, nodding toward her bowl. She ate slowly at first, waiting for him to reveal whatever ulterior motive might be hiding behind this simple meal. But he simply ate his own food, his attention on his bowl rather than on her. The soup was good, better than she had eaten in months, the salt pork fatty and rich, the vegetables still holding their shape. The bread was a day old but still soft enough when soaked in the broth. When her bowl was empty, Kieran refilled it without asking. She glanced up sharply, but he had already returned to his own meal. She ate the second bowl more slowly, savoring it, letting herself feel the warmth spread through her belly. "There is a stream about a mile north," Kieran said eventually, breaking the long silence. "It runs year-round. Good for washing clothes or bathing if you do not mind cold water. I check the fish traps there every few days." "Thank you for telling me," he nodded. "I noticed you limping earlier, favoring your right foot. There is salve in the jar by the hearth if you need it. Good for blisters." Kerra flexed her toes inside her worn boots. The blister had opened 2 days ago and had not healed well. "I will manage. Suit yourself. But infection is not something to take lightly this far from a healer." He had a point, though she was reluctant to accept more from him when she did not yet understand what he might want in return. Still, she had seen men lose feet to infections that started as something small. When they finished eating, she washed the bowls in the bucket by the door while Kieran banked the fire. "I wake when the roosters do," he said. "We will start with feeding the animals, then move to weeding the vegetable garden. After midday, I need help repairing the fence on the eastern boundary." "You good with tools?" "Good enough." "Then I will see you in the morning." He nodded toward the door, a clear dismissal. Kerra left without another word, crossing the yard to the barn as the last light faded from the sky. The loft was warm from the day's heat, and she spread her thin blanket over the hay before sitting to remove her boots. The blister was worse than she had thought, red and angry around the edges. She sat for a moment debating, then climbed back down the ladder and crossed to the house. Kieran was still awake, sitting at the table with a whetstone and a hunting knife. He looked up when she knocked softly on the open door. "The salve," she said. "If you meant what you said." He rose and took a small clay jar from the shelf, then handed it to her. "Keep it. I have more." She took the jar, their fingers brushing for just a moment. His skin was warm and calloused. "Thank you. You are welcome." She returned to the barn and applied the salve, which smelled of comfrey and something sharper, maybe yarrow. Within minutes, the angry heat had calmed. She lay back on the hay and stared up at the dark beams above her head, listening to the soft sounds of the animals below and the distant song of crickets. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something close to safe. The pattern of the days developed quickly. Wake before dawn. Feed and water the animals. Work in the fields or the garden or wherever Kieran directed. Break at midday for a simple meal of bread and cheese and water. Work until the light failed. Supper together at the table. Then sleep in the loft while Kieran slept in the house. He was a man of few words, but what he said was always direct and honest. He did not ask about her past, did not pry into why a lone orc woman was traveling the roads looking for work. When they worked side by side, he treated her as an equal, never assuming she could not handle a task because of her sex, never commenting on her strength except to acknowledge it with a simple nod when she lifted something heavy or worked longer without breaking than he expected. 3 weeks passed in this manner. The fields began to show the first green shoots of new growth. The fence was repaired. The chicken coop was straightened and reinforced. Kerra's hands developed new calluses over the old ones, and her face darkened from the sun. She ate regularly for the first time in months, and the hollow feeling in her belly faded. At night, she lay in the loft and listened to the sounds of the farm settling around her, and sometimes she even slept deeply enough to dream of nothing at all. But the brand on her shoulder never let her forget what she had been, what some would say she still was. She kept it hidden always, changing her dress only in the dark of the loft, washing at the stream when she was certain Kieran was occupied elsewhere. She told herself it did not matter, that this was only temporary, that soon enough she would move on before questions arose. But the truth was that she had begun to hope, and hope was dangerous. It was on a morning in early summer when everything changed. They were working in the garden together, Kerra pulling weeds while Kieran staked the tomato plants that were already growing tall and heavy with fruit. The sun was bright, the air thick with humidity that promised rain by evening. She had rolled up her sleeves to keep them clean, not thinking, focused on the stubborn roots of a thistle that did not want to release its hold on the soil. "What is that?" Kieran's voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made her freeze. She looked up and found him staring at her shoulder where her dress had slipped down, exposing the upper curve of the brand. She jerked the fabric back up, but it was too late. He had seen. "Nothing. It is nothing. That is a slave brand." He said it flatly, a statement rather than a question. Kerra stood slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. This was the moment that had come on every other farm, the moment when understanding dawned and kindness evaporated. "It is old. I am not anyone's slave now." "How old?" 10 years. I was freed." The lie came easily, worn smooth from repetition. Kieran set down the stakes and moved toward her. She tensed, but he stopped several feet away, not closing the distance into a threat. His eyes were on her face now, searching. "You ran." It was not a question, and she saw no point in denying it. "Yes." "Who owned you?" "A man named Harrow. He had a estate 3 territories north of here. He is dead now." That much at least was true. She had heard the news 2 years past from another escaped slave she met on the road. Kieran was quiet for a long moment. The air between them felt heavy, weighted with things unspoken. Finally, he said, "Does anyone hunt you still?" "I do not think so. It has been a long time and I have moved far from where I was held, but I cannot be certain." He nodded slowly, then surprised her by returning to his work with the tomato stakes as if nothing had changed. "Keep pulling the weeds. I want to finish this garden before the rain comes." Kerra stood frozen, uncertain. "You do not care." "I care that you ran from a man who had no right to mark another living being as property. I care that you have been looking over your shoulder for 10 years, but I do not care enough to send you away or to pretend I did not see." He glanced at her. "Unless you want to leave." "No." The word came out too quickly, too honest. "No, I do not want to leave." "Then stay. And Kerra," he waited until she met his eyes. "No one will mark you again, not while you are on my land." Something broke open inside her chest, a feeling she could not name. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and returned to pulling weeds. They worked in silence after that, but it was different now. The secret that had stood between them was gone, and in its place was something else, something tentative but real. That evening, as they ate supper, Kieran spoke again. "I was a soldier once, before I bought this farm." Kerra looked up from her bowl, surprised. He had never volunteered information about his past before. "I fought in the border wars 6 years back, saw things I would rather forget. When my service was done, I took my pay and came out here where it is quiet." He stared into his soup as if seeing something far away. "I learned that most of what we are told about enemies and monsters is lies told by men who profit from fear. I met orcs in those wars who fought with more honor than the humans beside me. I met humans who did things that would make demons weep." "Why are you telling me this?" she asked softly. "Because I want you to understand that I do not see you the way others might. I see someone who survived something terrible and kept going. That takes a kind of strength that is worth more than gold." He met her eyes. "You are safe here, Kerra, I mean that." She swallowed hard against the tightness in her throat. "Thank you. You are welcome." After that night, something shifted between them. The silence they shared was no longer the cautious quiet of strangers, but the comfortable ease of people who did not need words to communicate. Kieran began to smile more, small quirks of his mouth when she said something dry, or lifted something heavy with exaggerated ease. Kerra found herself lingering near him when they worked, drawn by the steady calm of his presence. She learned that he loved the early mornings best, when the mist still hung over the fields and the world felt new. That he had a scar on his left forearm from a knife fight in his soldier days that had nearly cost him the arm. That his parents were dead and he had no siblings, which was why he had come so far from where he was born to start over. That he carved small wooden figures in the evenings to keep his hands busy, animals mostly, though he claimed no particular skill. He learned that she had been taken from her clan when she was barely more than a child, that she remembered little of her life before Harrow, except the taste of her mother's cooking and the sound of her father's laugh. That she could track animals through the forest better than most hunters. That she sang sometimes when she thought no one could hear, old songs in the Orc tongue that she half remembered from childhood. That she was afraid of deep water because Harrow had punished her once by holding her head under until she nearly drowned. The summer deepened, the days long and hot. They fell into rhythms that felt ancient, tied to the land and the seasons. Planting gave way to tending, and the fields grew lush and green. Kieran taught her to fish in the stream, standing knee-deep in the cold water with makeshift poles. She taught him to identify edible plants in the forest, mushrooms and wild greens that could supplement their meals. And slowly, carefully, they began to touch in ways that were not strictly necessary. His hand on her shoulder when he passed behind her in the kitchen. Her fingers steadying his wrist when she helped him wrap a cut. Shoulders bumping as they walked side by side through the fields. Each touch was brief, almost accidental, but Kerra felt them like brands of an entirely different kind, burning not with pain but with something warmer, something she was afraid to name. It was on a night in late summer when the heat was oppressive, and sleep would not come that Kerra climbed down from the loft and sat on the porch of the barn, looking up at the stars scattered across the black sky. She heard footsteps and turned to find Kieran approaching from the house, his shirt unlaced and his hair mussed from tossing on his bed. "Too hot to sleep?" he asked. "Yes." "You too," he nodded and sat beside her on the porch steps, leaving a careful distance between them. For a while, they simply sat in companionable silence, listening to the sounds of the night insects and the occasional stamp of the horse in the barn behind them. "Kieran," she said finally, "why did you really let me stay? The truth." He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Because I know what it is to be seen as a thing rather than a person. In the war, we were just tools to be used and discarded. I watched men die because commanders did not see them as individuals worth saving, just numbers on a ledger. When I left, I promised myself I would never treat another living being that way." He turned to look at her, his face half shadowed in the starlight. "And because when I saw you standing at the edge of my field that first day, I saw someone who was tired of running. I understood that." "Are you running from something too?" "Memories, mostly. Ghosts of the men I killed, the friends I could not save. I came here to find peace, but peace is harder to find than I expected." Kerra understood that in a way she suspected few others could. "Thank you for seeing me. Not what I was, but what I am. I could say the same to you." They sat together until the air cooled enough to make sleep possible, and when they parted, Kerra felt the space between them humming with unspoken things. The crops came in strong that harvest season. Kieran hired a wagon from town to take the surplus to market, and he returned with coin enough to make necessary repairs and buy supplies for the winter. He also returned with news that made Kerra's blood run cold. "There are slave hunters working the territory," he said that evening over supper, his voice grim. "I heard talk in town. They are looking for runaways, offering rewards. Someone claimed to have seen an orc woman matching a description near the eastern farms. Kerra's hand tightened on her spoon. "I should leave. I should not bring trouble to your door. You should stay." Kieran's voice was firm. "This is your home as much as mine now. We will handle it if they come. You do not understand what these men are like. They do not ask politely. They take what they want and hurt anyone who stands in their way. I was a soldier, Kerra. I know exactly what men like that are like." His eyes were hard. "And I meant what I said. No one will mark you again." She wanted to argue, to make him understand the danger, but she also wanted desperately to believe him. In the end, she nodded, though she slept poorly that night, listening for the sound of horses or strange voices. 3 days later they came. Kerra was in the garden harvesting squash when she heard the horses. 2 riders approaching from the south. She straightened slowly, her heart hammering, and saw Kieran emerge from the barn, a pitchfork in his hands. Not a weapon, not exactly, but it could serve as one if needed. The riders were exactly what she expected. Hard-faced men with weapons openly displayed, wearing leather armor that had seen use. The leader was a tall man with a scar bisecting his left cheek, his eyes flat and cold. The other was younger, maybe 20 summers, with the eager cruelty of someone who enjoyed his work too much. "Help you gentlemen," Kieran called out, his voice neutral but his body tense. The scarred man smiled without warmth. "We are looking for a runaway." Orc woman, about 30 summers old, tall and strong, might be using the name Kerra or Kessa. She has a brand on her left shoulder, property of the Harrow estate. "The Harrow estate," Kieran said mildly. "I heard Harrow died 2 years past. His son holds the property now. The woman is still legally his property. She ran 10 years ago, but the family wants her returned. There is a reward of 20 gold for information leading to her capture." 20 gold. Enough to buy seed and animals and supplies for several years, enough to tempt most men. Kerra's throat tightened, and she began to calculate how quickly she could reach the forest if she ran now. Kieran looked directly at the men. "I have not seen anyone matching that description. Sorry, I cannot help you." The younger hunter's eyes slid past Kieran and fixed on Kerra where she stood frozen in the garden. "What about her, my farmhand? She is human, though I suppose the dirt makes it hard to tell from a distance." Kieran did not even glance at her, his attention fixed on the hunters. The scarred man urged his horse forward, moving closer to the garden. Kerra forced herself to remain still, though every instinct screamed at her to run. He studied her for a long moment, and she knew he could see exactly what she was. Green skin, tusks, pointed ears. There was no mistaking her for human. "That is an orc," the man said flatly. "That is my business," Kieran replied, "and you are on my property without invitation. I will ask you to leave. We have authority to search for runaways. If you are harboring stolen property, you can be arrested." "Show me the papers." The scarred man hesitated, and Kieran smiled without humor. "You do not have papers, do you? Which means you are bounty hunters working on rumor and hoping to get lucky, which means you have no legal authority at all." "Legal or not, that is an orc woman and we are taking her." The younger hunter began to dismount, reaching for the rope on his saddle. Kieran moved fast, faster than Kerra would have expected, placing himself between the hunter and the garden. The pitchfork was no longer just a farming tool but a weapon held with the easy competence of a man who knew how to use it. "I will say this once more," Kieran said quietly. "Leave my property. Now." The scarred man's hand moved to the sword at his hip. "You want to die for an orc slave. I want you to leave. But if you draw that sword, we will find out who dies." The tension stretched like a bowstring drawn too tight. Kerra slowly set down the squash she was holding and moved her hand toward the knife at her belt, though she knew it would be little use against armed men. If it came to violence, she would fight beside Kieran and damn the consequences. The scarred man stared at Kieran for a long moment, weighing his options. Whatever he saw in Kieran's face must have convinced him that the threat was real, because he finally said, "This is not over. We will be back with proper authority. You do that. I will be here." The hunters wheeled their horses and rode away, the younger one glancing back over his shoulder with a look that promised violence. Kerra watched until they disappeared over the ridge, then released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Kieran lowered the pitchfork slowly, his hands shaking just slightly. "We need to prepare. They will be back and they will bring more men." "I am sorry," Kerra said, the words thick in her throat. "I am so sorry. I never wanted to bring this to you." He turned to her and his expression softened. "Stop. You did not bring this. They did. Now come on, we have work to do." Over the next few days they prepared for the inevitable return. Kieran oiled his old sword, the one from his soldier days, and showed Kerra where he kept the bow and quiver of arrows. They reinforced the doors of the house and barn, stocked food and water in case of a siege. He taught her to shoot the bow, and she proved a quick study, her strong arms handling the draw with ease. But more than the physical preparations, they talked about what would come after. Kieran suggested they could flee together, head further west where the authorities had less reach. Kerra refused, insisting she would not let him lose everything he had built. They argued about it in the evenings, their voices rising and falling in the firelight. "You are not thinking clearly," Kieran said on the third night. "This farm is just land and wood. You are a person. There is no comparison. This farm is your dream, your peace. I will not take that from you, and I will not let them take you." He stood abruptly, pacing the small room. "Kerra, do you not understand? You are not just a person who works my fields. You are." He stopped, his back to her, his shoulders tense. "You matter to me." The words hung in the air between them. Kerra stood slowly, crossing the room until she was just behind him. "How much?" she asked softly. He turned, and she saw something raw and vulnerable in his face. "Enough that the thought of them putting their hands on you makes me want to burn the world down. Enough that I would rather lose this farm 1,000 times than see you in chains again." His hand rose, hovering near her cheek, but not quite touching. "Enough that I have been trying not to feel this way because it is complicated and dangerous and probably foolish, but I cannot help it anymore." Kerra closed the distance, pressing her cheek into his palm. His skin was warm and rough, and she felt the slight tremor in his fingers. "I feel the same," she whispered. "I have felt it for weeks now. I was afraid to say it." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid you would not want me, not truly. Afraid this was gratitude or pity." "Look at me." He waited until her eyes met his. "This is not gratitude or pity. This is me wanting you so badly that I ache with it. This is me thinking about you every moment we are apart and cursing myself for being a fool who fell in love with someone who deserves better than a farmer with ghosts and a dying dream." "You love me." Her voice broke on the words. "Yes. God help me, I love you." She kissed him then, rising on her toes to press her mouth to his. He made a sound low in his throat and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against him. The kiss was clumsy at first, their tusks making the angle awkward, but they adjusted, and then it was perfect. He tasted like the mint tea he had been drinking and something else, something uniquely him. His hands moved over her back, her sides, learning the shape of her through the fabric of her dress. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I do not want to hide this. I do not want to pretend, but I need to know what you want. I want you. I want this. I want to stay here and build something with you if you will have me." "If I will have you," he laughed, the sound breaking with emotion. "Kerra, I would give you anything." "Everything?" Then give me this. Give me a life where I am not afraid anymore, where I am not property or a runaway or a burden. Give me a home. Yes, God, yes. They made love that night in his bed, the first time either of them had allowed themselves to truly touch and be touched by another person with love rather than duty or force. Kieran was gentle, careful, constantly asking if she was all right, if she wanted to stop. But Kerra did not want gentle, not entirely. She wanted to feel alive, to reclaim her body as her own. She guided his hands, showed him what pleased her, let herself make sounds she had never allowed before. When he moved inside her, his eyes on hers, she felt something break free that she had kept locked away for 10 years. Afterward, they lay tangled together, sweat cooling on their skin, and she felt safer than she had since she was a child in her mother's arms. "We should get married," Kieran said into the darkness. Kerra lifted her head from his chest. "What? If you are my wife, legally bound to me, it becomes much harder for them to take you. A man's wife is not property to be seized without cause. We would have legal standing to fight them." "Is that the only reason?" "No." He stroked her hair, his fingers gentle. "I want to marry you because I love you, because I want to wake up beside you every morning for the rest of my life. Because when I think about the future, you are in every vision of it. But the legal protection does not hurt. Humans and orcs cannot marry. It is not allowed. It is not common, but there is no law against it. I checked when I was in town, subtly. The magistrate in the next territory over is known for being unconventional. He would do it." Kerra's heart was racing. Marriage. A real marriage, not bondage or slavery, but a choice made by two people who loved each other. It felt impossible, like reaching for the sun. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Kieran smiled, bright and genuine, and kissed her again. They made love once more, slower this time, savoring each touch and kiss. When they finally slept, it was with their bodies pressed close, Kerra's head on his shoulder and his arm around her waist. They woke to the sound of horses. Kieran was out of bed in an instant, pulling on his trousers and reaching for his sword. Kerra dressed quickly, her heart hammering as she recognized the sound. Many horses, at least 6, maybe more. The hunters had returned and they had brought reinforcements. "Stay in the house," Kieran commanded, moving toward the door. "No, I will not hide while you face them alone." He looked at her, conflict clear in his face, then nodded. "Together, then." They went out onto the porch as the riders came into view. 8 men this time, including the 2 original hunters. The rest wore uniforms of a sort, poorly maintained but identifiable. Local militia, probably paid off or convinced that they were doing lawful work. The leader was an older man with graying hair and an officious bearing, a rolled parchment in his hand. "Kieran Lawson," he called out. "I am he. I am Captain Yorvin of the Territorial Militia. I have been authorized to search your property for a fugitive slave, property of the Harrow estate. You will stand aside and allow us to conduct our search." "Show me your authorization," Kieran said calmly. The captain rode forward and handed him the parchment. Kieran read it carefully, his expression darkening. When he looked up, his voice was hard. "This is signed by a magistrate in the Northern Territory. It has no authority here." "It has whatever authority we say it has. Now stand aside." "No," the captain's eyes narrowed. "You are obstructing lawful business. I can have you arrested." "Then arrest me. But you will not set foot on my property without proper authority, and you will not touch her." The captain's gaze moved to Kerra standing behind Kieran. "That is the fugitive. Hand her over and we will leave peacefully. She is my betrothed. We are to be married within the week. She is not going anywhere." That caused a stir among the riders. Marriage between human and orc was unusual enough that even these men hesitated. The scarred hunter spurred his horse forward angrily. Betrothed or not, she is still property. Marriage does not change that. Actually, it does, Kieran said. Once we are married, she becomes a legal person under my protection. The claim of the Harrow estate becomes void. You cannot marry her before we take her, the hunter snarled. I already have. The lie was smoothly delivered, and Kerra understood immediately what he was doing. She moved to stand beside him, taking his hand in hers. We were married 2 days ago by a traveling priest, she said, keeping her voice steady. I am Kieran Lawson now, not property of anyone. The captain looked uncertain now, glancing at the parchment in his hand as if it might have answers. We were not informed of any marriage. Because it is not your business, Kieran said. And now, I will ask you one final time to leave my property. If you do not, I will defend my home and my wife with whatever force is necessary. You are 1 man against 8, the scarred hunter said. Then it will be an interesting fight. Kieran raised his sword and Kerra moved to stand at his back, the knife in her hand. She knew they could not win against 8 armed men, but she would die before she let them take her without a fight. She would die free rather than live in chains. The captain raised his hand, stopping the men from advancing. For a long moment, everything hung in balance. Then, from the south, another rider appeared, coming fast. The figure resolved into an older man in good clothes, riding a horse too fine for this rough country. He pulled up beside the captain, his face red with exertion. Captain Yorvin, I am Magistrate Holden from the Western Territory. I need to speak with you immediately. The captain looked annoyed but dismounted, and the 2 men moved a short distance away, speaking in voices too low for Kerra to hear. She could see the captain shaking his head, the magistrate gesturing emphatically. Finally, the captain returned to his horse, his expression sour. It seems there has been a development, he announced. The Harrow estate has withdrawn its claim on the fugitive known as Kerra. Apparently, the son has sold the estate and moved to the capital. He has released all claims on any outstanding debts or property, including slaves. Kerra felt her knees weaken. What? The magistrate rode forward, smiling kindly. It is true, my dear. I have the papers here, signed and sealed. You are free, legally free. No one can claim ownership of you. He glanced at Kieran. And I understand congratulations are in order on your upcoming marriage. Kieran lowered his sword slowly, disbelief and hope warring on his face. I may have been premature in saying we were already married. Well, then, we should correct that, should we not? I am authorized to perform marriages. We could do it right now if you wish. Kerra looked at Kieran, tears streaming down her face. Is this real? It is real, he said, pulling her into his arms. You are free. You are finally free. The hunters left, grumbling but unable to do anything without a valid claim. The militia dispersed. The magistrate dismounted and spent the next hour with Kieran and Kerra, reviewing the papers that declared her freedom, explaining her rights, and then, as the sun climbed toward noon, performing a simple marriage ceremony on the porch of the farmhouse. Kerra wore her patched work dress and no shoes. Kieran wore his work clothes, his hair still mussed from sleep. They had no rings, no flowers, no guests except the magistrate and the chickens scratching in the yard. But when Kieran took her hands in his and promised to love her and protect her for all his days, and when she promised the same, it was the most beautiful moment of her life. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the magistrate said, beaming. You may kiss your bride. Kieran cupped her face in his hands and kissed her softly, sweetly, and Kerra tasted salt from her own tears mixing with the kiss. When they pulled apart, the magistrate was wiping his own eyes. I have performed 100 marriages, he said, but I think this one might be my favorite. Be happy, you two, you have earned it. He left them his blessing and the legal documents, refusing payment beyond a meal of bread and cheese. When he rode away, Kerra and Kieran stood together on the porch, watching him disappear down the road. "What do we do now?" Kerra asked. Kieran smiled. Now we finish the harvest, and then we prepare for winter, and then we live our lives together the way we choose." "That sounds perfect." They turned back toward the fields hand in hand and began the work of building the life they had promised each other. The harvest that year was the best the farm had ever produced. Working together, Kieran and Kerra brought in wheat and corn and squash and beans, enough to see them through the winter with surplus to sell. They made trip after trip to the market, and though some people stared at the sight of a human man and an orc woman side by side, no one dared say anything unkind. Kieran's reputation as a former soldier and the legal marriage documents the magistrate had provided gave them a protection that Kerra had never known before. As fall deepened and the air turned cold, they prepared the farm for winter. They reinforced the barn, stocked firewood, preserved vegetables in jars and salt. In the evenings, they sat by the fire in the house that was now truly theirs together, and Kieran taught Kerra to read and write, something she had never been allowed to learn. She was a quick student, hungry for knowledge, and within weeks she could pen simple letters and read passages from the few books Kieran owned. They talked about the future often now, no longer afraid to plan beyond the next day. Kieran wanted to expand the farm, maybe buy the adjacent property that was going unused. Kerra wanted to plant an orchard, apple and pear trees that would take years to fruit, but would feed them for decades once they did. They talked about children someday, wondering if such a thing was even possible between their two species, but agreeing that they would face that question if and when it came. On a night in early winter, the first snow falling outside, Kerra stood by the window watching the flakes drift down while Kieran carved a small wooden figure at the table. She touched the place on her shoulder where the brand lay hidden beneath her nightdress, feeling the ridged scar tissue. "I used to hate this mark," she said softly. "I used to wish I could cut it out of my skin." Kieran looked up from his carving. "And now I think maybe it is just a part of my story, a reminder of where I came from and how far I have traveled. It does not define me anymore." He stood and crossed to her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "You define yourself. You always have. That is what makes you strong." She leaned back into his warmth, feeling safe and loved and free. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the fields in white, blanketing the farm in silence. Spring would come again, as it always did, and they would plant new seeds and tend new growth. But for now, in this moment, everything was perfect. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me, for choosing me, for making a vow that no one would mark me again and keeping it." Kieran turned her in his arms so he could see her face. "I did not keep that vow alone. You fought for your own freedom every day, long before I ever met you. I just had the honor of fighting beside you at the end." She kissed him then, long and deep, pouring everything she felt into it. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and smiling, Kieran took her hand and led her toward the bed. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other anew as they did every time, whispering promises and endearments in the darkness. Afterward, as Kerra drifted toward sleep in Kieran's arms, she thought about the girl she had been 10 years ago, branded and broken, certain that she would die in chains. That girl could never have imagined this life, this love, this freedom. But she had survived long enough to find it, and that made every hardship worth it. Winter passed in a blur of quiet days and long nights. Kieran and Kerra fell into the rhythms of married life with surprising ease, each learning the habits and quirks of the other. He discovered that she sang while she worked, old songs in the orc tongue that made him smile, even though he did not understand the words. She discovered that he talked to the animals as if they could understand him, long conversations with the horse and the chickens about the weather and the state of the world. They had their first real fight in late winter, a stupid argument about whether to sell the old plow and buy a new one or try to repair it again. Voices were raised, frustrations aired. But when the anger burned out, they found each other in the barn where Kerra had gone to cool off, and they apologized and held each other and agreed that they would figure things out together. The fight did not break them. If anything, it made them stronger, proving that they could weather storms together. When spring came and the snow melted, they planted the fields again. But this year was different. This year, Kerra was not a hired hand or a fugitive. She was a wife, a partner, a co-owner of this land. They worked side by side, equal in all ways, and when the first green shoots appeared, they celebrated together. Kieran bought the adjacent property as planned, borrowing from a bank in town. The magistrate, who had become a friend, co-signed the loan without hesitation. The additional land meant more work, but it also meant more opportunity. They hired day laborers during the busy seasons, and Kerra found herself training others in the work she had learned over the years. It was strange and wonderful to be respected for her knowledge, to have people look to her for guidance. On the first anniversary of their marriage, Kieran surprised her. She woke to find him already up and dressed, a pack slung over his shoulder. "Come with me," he said, grinning. "I have something to show you." They walked together into the forest north of the farm, following the stream until they came to a clearing Kerra had never seen before. In the center stood a young tree, barely more than a sapling, its branches green with new growth. At its base was a flat stone with words carved into it. Kerra moved closer, sounding out the letters slowly. "Here grows a new life, rooted in love and watered by freedom. Planted by Kieran and Kieran Lawson on the anniversary of their marriage." She looked at him, tears blurring her vision. "You did this. I wanted to mark this day, not with a brand or a scar, but with something living, something that will grow and thrive just like us." He took her hand. "I thought we could come here every year, watch it grow, remember how far we have come." Kerra could not speak through the tightness in her throat, so she just kissed him, pouring every ounce of love and gratitude into it. They stood there for a long time, holding each other beneath the young tree, listening to the sound of the stream and the birds and the wind in the leaves. Life continued, marked by the turning of seasons and the passage of time. The farm prospered. The tree grew. Kieran and Kerra grew too, not apart but together, their love deepening with each shared sunrise and sunset. They learned each other's scars, both visible and hidden, and loved each other not despite them but because of them, because those scars were proof of survival, of strength, of the journey that had brought them together. In their third year of marriage, Kerra discovered she was pregnant. It was unexpected, something they had hoped for but never truly believed possible. When she told Kieran, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. They were cautious, neither of them knowing what to expect from a pregnancy between human and orc. But the magistrate connected them with a healer in a distant city who had experience with such rare unions. The healer assured them that while the pregnancy would be monitored closely, there was no reason to believe Kerra and the child would not both be healthy. Kerra worked the farm until the day her labor began, refusing to be treated as fragile. When the contractions started, Kieran rode for the healer while Kerra walked circles around the farmhouse, breathing through the pain. The healer arrived in time to oversee a long but uncomplicated birth. At dawn, as the sun painted the sky pink and gold, Kerra delivered a daughter. She was beautiful, her skin a pale green, softer than Kerra's darker tone but unmistakably orcish. She had Kieran's brown eyes and Kerra's black hair, and when she yawned, they could see the smallest buds of tusks beginning to form. She was perfect. What should we name her? Kieran asked, cradling the baby with the careful reverence of a man holding the most precious thing in the world. Kerra thought of her own mother, a memory so faint it was almost like dreaming. My mother's name was Grenna, but I want her to have a name that bridges both our worlds. Grace, Kieran said softly. Grenna's meaning in the old orc tongue means strength and beauty together. Grace means the same in the human language. What if we call her Grace? Grace Lawson, Kerra said, testing the name. Yes, that is perfect. They brought Grace home to the farm, and life changed in ways both exhausting and wonderful. The baby kept them up at night with her crying but rewarded them with smiles and coos during the day. Kieran proved to be a natural father, gentle and patient, singing to Grace when she fussed and carrying her in a sling while he did the lighter farm work. Kerra nursed the baby and marveled at the fierce protectiveness she felt, a love so strong it was almost painful. As Grace grew, it became clear she had inherited the best of both her parents. She was strong like Kerra, able to lift things that should have been too heavy for a child her age. But she had Kieran's curiosity and patience, studying everything around her with wide brown eyes, asking endless questions as soon as she learned to speak. The neighbors, initially wary of the half-orc child, found it hard to maintain their prejudice in the face of Grace's infectious laughter and sweet nature. She won people over without trying, simply by being herself. Other children played with her without hesitation, unburdened by the biases of their parents. On Grace's second birthday, Kieran and Kerra took her to the clearing where the anniversary tree stood, now tall and strong. They had a small celebration there, just the three of them, with a cake Kerra had baked and wildflowers Grace had picked. As they ate and laughed together, Kerra looked at her husband and daughter and felt a contentment so complete it brought tears to her eyes. "What are you thinking?" Kieran asked, noticing her expression. "I am thinking about the day I came to this farm," she said. "I was so afraid, so certain that I would never find a place I could belong, and now look at us." Kieran reached over and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I am glad you were brave enough to ask for work that day. I am glad I was smart enough to say yes. I am glad, too." Grace toddled over and climbed into Kerra's lap, sticky fingers from the cake marking Kerra's dress. Kerra did not care. She wrapped her arms around her daughter and looked up at Kieran, and in that moment, everything that had come before, all the pain and fear and running, felt worth it. Because it had led her here, to this life, to this family, to this love. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. The farm expanded again when a neighboring farmer retired and sold his land to Kieran at a fair price. They hired permanent help, a young human couple and an orc family who had recently arrived in the territory seeking work. Kerra took particular joy in helping the orc family settle, remembering her own desperate arrival and wanting to provide for others what Kieran had provided for her. Grace grew into a spirited child and then a thoughtful young woman. She learned to read and write from both her parents, learned farming from working the land, and learned kindness from the example set every day in her home. When she was 10, she asked about the scar on Kerra's shoulder, the brand that was usually hidden but which she had glimpsed when helping her mother dress. Kerra and Kieran exchanged a glance, then sat their daughter down and told her the truth. They did not spare the difficult parts, believing she was old enough to understand, but they also emphasized the hope and the triumph. When the story was finished, Grace hugged her mother tightly. "I am glad you ran away," she said. "And I am glad Papa helped you, because otherwise I would not be here." "That is true," Kerra said, stroking her daughter's hair. "And you are the best thing that ever happened to us." "Will anyone ever try to hurt me because I am different?" Grace asked, her voice small. "Some people might," Kieran said honestly. "But you are strong and smart, and you have parents who love you and will always fight for you. And more importantly, you know your own worth. No one can take that from you unless you let them." Grace nodded, seeming to accept this. As she grew older, she did indeed face prejudice from time to time, people who saw her mixed heritage as wrong or unnatural. But she also had friends who loved her, neighbors who respected her family, and parents who had given her a foundation of confidence and self-worth that could not be easily shaken. When Grace was 15, she came home one day with news that made both Kieran and Kerra's hearts clench with old fears. There were whispers in town of new laws being proposed in the Northern Territories, laws that would require registration of all orc individuals and restrict their movements. "It will not pass," Kieran said firmly, though Kerra could hear the worry beneath his words. "The magistrate and others like him will fight it, and even if it does pass there, we are not in that territory, we are protected here." "But what if it spreads?" Grace asked. "What if they come here?" Kerra took her daughter's hands. "Then we will fight, together, as we always have. We will not let fear control our lives." The laws did pass in the Northern Territories, sparking outrage and protests. But in their own territory, the magistrate and others worked to ensure similar laws were never enacted. It was not a perfect solution. The world was still full of prejudice and hate, but it was progress. And Kieran, Kerra, and Grace chose to focus on what they could control: their own lives, their own community, their own commitment to treating all people with dignity and respect. More years passed. Grace fell in love with a young human man from town, a carpenter's apprentice with kind eyes and a gentle manner. Kieran and Kerra approved, seeing in him the same qualities that had drawn them to each other. They married in the same clearing where the anniversary tree stood, now tall and broad enough to provide shade for the wedding party. It was a small ceremony, intimate and beautiful, and when the young couple exchanged vows, Kerra thought her heart might burst with joy. Grace and her husband built a home on a portion of the farm, and soon Kieran and Kerra were grandparents. The baby, a boy, had mostly human features but with a slight greenish tint to his skin and his grandmother's pointed ears. Kerra held him and marveled at how the world could change, how love could create something so beautiful from what others saw as impossible. On the 20th anniversary of their marriage, Kieran and Kerra stood together beneath the tree they had planted 2 decades before. It was massive now, its branches spreading wide, its roots deep in the earth. They had carved their initials into the stone at its base years ago, and now they added Grace's initials and her husband's and the baby's, a family tree in every sense. 20 years, Kieran said, his arm around Kerra's waist. His hair was graying now, his face lined with the marks of a life well lived. "It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once." "I know what you mean," Kerra said. She was older too, her own hair shot through with silver, her hands marked with the calluses of decades of work. But she felt happy, deeply and completely happy in a way she had never imagined possible when she was young. "Do you have any regrets?" "Not a single one." "You?" "Not one." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the sound of the stream, the wind in the leaves, the distant laughter of their grandson playing with Grace in the farmyard. Then Kieran said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For trusting me that first day, for staying, for building this life with me, for giving me a family and a purpose and a love that I never thought I deserved." Kerra turned to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers. "You gave me the same. You gave me freedom. You gave me a home. You kept your promise that no one would mark me again, and you gave me a life worth living." She smiled through the tears that were forming. "I love you, Kieran Lawson. I have loved you for 20 years, and I will love you for whatever time we have left. I love you too, Kerra Lawson, always and forever." They kissed beneath the tree they had planted, and in that kiss was everything they had been and everything they would become. It was a promise renewed, a love reaffirmed, a life celebrated. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, they walked hand in hand back toward the farmhouse. Smoke rose from the chimney, warm and welcoming. Grace stood on the porch with her husband and son, waving as her parents approached. Inside, there would be supper and laughter and stories told around the fire. There would be comfort and safety and belonging. Kerra paused at the edge of the yard and looked back one more time at the tree standing tall in the clearing, a living monument to everything they had overcome and everything they had built. The brand on her shoulder no longer burned with pain or shame. It was just a mark, a piece of her history. What mattered was not what had been done to her, but what she had chosen to do afterward. She had chosen to keep running until she found a place to rest. She had chosen to trust when trust was terrifying. She had chosen to love when love seemed impossible. And those choices had made all the difference. "Come on," Kieran said gently, tugging her hand. "Everyone is waiting." "I am coming," she said, and together they walked into the warmth of their home, into the life they had created, into the future that stretched out before them full of hope and possibility. The orc woman bore her old master's brand, yes, but the farmer had kept his vow. No one would mark her again. She was marked now only by love, by family, by freedom, by joy. And those were marks she wore with pride.